আসসালামু আলাইকুম। সবাইকে স্বাগত জানাচ্ছি আমার দেশ স্পেশালে। আজ আমি এবং আমার সহকর্মী আবু সুফিয়ান কথা বলবো জাতিসংঘের নির্যাতন বিরোধী বিশেষ দূত ডক্টর অ্যালিস জিল এডওয়ার্ডসের সঙ্গে। অস্ট্রেলীয় বংশোদ্ভূত ডক্টর অ্যালিস জিল এডওয়ার্ডস একজন প্রখ্যাত আন্তর্জাতিক মানবাধিকার আইনজীবী ও বিশেষজ্ঞ, যিনি বর্তমানে ইউনাইটেড নেশনস স্পেশাল রিপোর্টার অন টর্চার অ্যান্ড আদার ক্রুয়েল, ইনহিউম্যান অর ডিগ্রেডিং ট্রিটমেন্ট অর পানিশমেন্টের বিষয়ক 7th স্পেশাল রিপোর্টার এবং এই পদে নিযুক্ত প্রথম নারী। দীর্ঘ 25 বছরের কর্মজীবনে তিনি পুলিশিং, ফৌজদারি বিচার ব্যবস্থা এবং কারাগার সংস্কার নিয়ে কাজ করেছেন। বিশেষ করে ধর্ষণ ও যৌন সহিংসতাকে নির্যাতনের একটা রূপ হিসেবে বিশ্বব্যাপী আইনি স্বীকৃতি দেওয়ার ক্ষেত্রে তার ভূমিকা অনস্বীকার্য। এর আগে তিনি কনভেনশন এগেইনস্ট টর্চার ইনিশিয়েটিভের প্রধান এবং ইউএনএইচসিআর এর নীতি ও আইনি উপদেষ্টা হিসেবে দায়িত্ব পালন করেছেন। First of all, welcome to Bangladesh. Do you like our country?
I have had a very pleasant stay here in Dhaka, and you have a fascinating country with a very rich and a special history.
Then now I will start the questions. What's your impression of the present government's effort to tackle the culture of custodian torture in Bangladesh?
So I'm in Bangladesh at a very consequential moment. I think there are a lot of really important opportunities and very high expectations, both from the general public but also from the international community. What I've heard and observed in the last few days is that the violence in Bangladesh is deep-seated, it's structural and it's long-standing. There are a great many challenges for the government to face, and I was pleased to hear that they are thinking about establishing a parliamentary commission on human rights, because what is important about human rights is it shouldn't be a political issue. Everybody has human rights, and these committees, which would be cross-party, involving all the political parties, can really change the dynamic in a country to make sure that human rights are not politicized.
Then you were optimistic about the present situation. Do you have any plans to assist the Bangladesh police in capacity building, specifically regarding the adaptation of scientific interrogation techniques?
So you raise a really good point. What we now know at the international level, and many governments also know this, that when you engage in coercive, violent practices in interrogations, what happens is that there are stresses on the brain. Witnesses are not able to recall properly. People are forced to sign documents under coercion and exertion, and it leads to grave miscarriages of justice. There are now great principles that are available, the Mendes principles on investigative interviewing, that are available to the government and the police to start implementing. This, as I understand it, is one of the sites where torture and other ill treatment is most prevalent in Bangladesh, but also in other countries. The first hours after arrest are the most crucial. There need to be really proper safeguards in place. Detention needs to be registered. People need to have the right to contact a family member or another person, to be able to have a lawyer, to have a medical examination if requested and required, and also to have their interviews, and this would be a great development, to be audio or video recorded. This is a surety that the police and the investigators are not coercing individuals. They can be recalled later in court if someone alleges they've been subjected to torture. Really what I'd like to see is the policing sector, with a roots and branch reform, a real clean out of some of these practices that have been allowed to be institutionalized. And some of that is because of lack of forensic capacity, lack of basic training in the very ordinary investigative techniques of checking alibis, of making sure you have the right person in custody, so identity checks, etc. We don't need to go too advanced. It's just that one needs to observe all of the basic standards which are required under international law, and I would say also by your constitution and your other laws, to make sure that whoever is in conflict with the law that they are treated fairly, with dignity and with respect.
We also do. Since Bangladesh has ratified both United Nations Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, will you encourage the government to ensure formal compensation for the victims of torture?
So, Article 14 of the United Nations Convention Against Torture, which is a groundbreaking statute that Bangladesh ratified many, many years ago, requires that states provide rehabilitation, a remedy, and the right to compensation for any torture or treatment. Recently, Bangladesh also, under the interim administration, withdrew their reservation to this article. In other words, withdrew their objection to it internationally. So now the space is open for the government to set up a procedure whereby people can report safely and fairly of what has happened to them, not only in the 2024 July uprising, but also throughout the last number of years. I've heard terrible cases of torture and ill treatment in police custody, on the street, in people's homes, as well as in public protests. And also in prisons. To be able to make those claims for compensation, the government will need to establish a fund, potentially in a proper procedure that people can go about and do that safely.
Right. Then, given the perception that the effectiveness of UN bodies has been seriously undermined by ongoing gross human rights violation in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, what concrete measure can UN mandated institutions take to ensure accountability for these violations?
So what I always say is that international law is a consent-based system. States have actually agreed and consented to these rules since 1945, after the Second World War, and increasingly as new ways of understanding human rights have developed. It's very important that states take their international obligations seriously, but even more importantly than that, even though I am a UN entity, is that they incorporate them into domestic laws, that they establish procedures and practices at the national level. Really, human rights are about what people experience in their everyday lives in their own countries. And it's important that governments take those seriously, whether it's in Bangladesh or, as you say, in these other terrible hotspots around the world where there are many egregious violations going on. And in addition to that, of course, accountability. There need to be functioning justice systems at the national level. We have some international systems, but really I see the large scale of violations in this era requires national governments and national authorities to step up, to be able to review those cases, to have the courts process those cases fairly. We are at a very tricky international moment, and it relies on all governments to play their part in ensuring that human rights are upheld. I think it's very important that any changes to the structures of the police and law enforcement and security services is not simply a rebranding, a renaming, but there is a real institutional change to both their practices and procedures, the weapons that they are able to carry and the equipment that they are issued. The entire policing and security sector, for me, must be about servicing the people. They are part of the people and not a force against the people. And I think this also needs a mentality change. I can't comment on her trial itself, but what I would say for any of the victims and survivors from those that terrible incident, that there is a procedure whereby they can make complaints safely and with dignity, that there is a procedure of truth-telling and reconciliation between the different communities. What I'd really like to see, and the entire international community is behind Bangladesh, to rebuild their institutions, to build public trust in those institutions, and that starts with building a culture of human rights.
Okay, thank you very much.